At 7:30 in the morning, Mountain Time, on July 18th, a small group of people inside a building in Boise, Idaho, changed one digit on a chart. 4 became 5. That is the entire event. There was no press conference, no emergency broadcast, no red banner running across the bottom of a news screen. But that single digit is the reason military C-130 cargo aircraft are now sitting on tarmacs in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and in San Bernardino and Santa Maria, California, loaded with pressurized tanks of fire retardant. The people are the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group at the National Interagency Fire Center. The chart is the National Preparedness Level, and 5 is the top of it. There is no 6. The last time the United States stood at Preparedness Level 5 was October of 2024. As of the 8:36 update on the morning of July 24th, the National Interagency Coordination Center lists 4,000 and 10,417 acres burned across the country this year, from 41,779 separate fires, with 70 large fires uncontained and 24 complex incident management teams already committed to incidents. 15 states carry above normal fire potential, and here is the detail that should make you sit forward. August has not started yet. Subscribe now, because this story is going to need updates. And stick around to the end, because I am going to show you exactly why reaching the ceiling of that scale is not the top of the danger. It is the moment a completely different kind of problem begins. Before we get into the details, I want to be upfront about something. Preparedness Level 5 is not a national emergency declaration. No governor stood at a podium on July 18th. No federal disaster was declared, and the change did not by itself put one additional firefighter on one additional fire. On its own, this is an internal resource management setting used by an interagency coordination group, and 4 million acres by late July is not an unprecedented number. Stanton Florea, a spokesman for the National Interagency Fire Center, told reporters on July 20th that the 10-year average for this point on the calendar sits at roughly 3 million acres, which makes this season well above average but nowhere near the worst on record. 3 separate seasons in the past decade finished north of 10 million acres, so I am not going to tell you the country is on fire. What makes this particular event worth a full breakdown is not the acreage, and it is not any single incident. It is what Preparedness Level 5 actually reports about inventory. It means the national pool of firefighting resources is fully committed on an ongoing basis, with effectively nothing held back. It means the Pentagon has already been asked to fill the gap, and all of that happened before the month that historically burns hardest. Here is the record, as flatly as I can give it to you. On July 18, 2026, at 7:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group at the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise raised the country to National Preparedness Level 5, the highest step on a scale that runs from 1 to 5. Per the Fire Center, it is the first time the nation has been at that level since October of 2024. The National Interagency Coordination Center dashboard, last updated at 8:36 a.m. on July 24th, lists 10,417 acres burned in the United States so far this calendar year, from 41,779 individual fires. The situation report used for that same window listed 70 large fires burning without containment and 24 complex incident management teams assigned. The Fire Center's own daily National Fire News post for July 24 puts the number of large fires being worked at 78, including 15 new large incidents in the previous 24 hours, with 23,151 firefighters and support personnel engaged nationwide, along with 513 crews, 1,327 engines, and 153 helicopters. Red flag warnings expanded significantly overnight, and heat advisories or extreme heat warnings covered wide areas of the country. The Northwest geographic area alone accounted for 37 of those large fires and was still reporting new starts. For scale on the terminology, the Fire Center counts a fire as large at 300 acres in grass and 100 acres in timber. 4 days earlier, on July 20, the National Situation Report listed 73 uncontained large fires, 17 of them new in a single day, with 22 complex teams committed and 17,683 personnel assigned. The Northwest geographic area was itself at Preparedness Level 5 and held 36 of those uncontained fires. The Rocky Mountain area sat one step lower at Level 4 with 7 uncontained large fires, 6 of them burning in Colorado. In northern Minnesota, rainfall moderated behavior on the Bear Trap and Sioux fires, though homes, communication sites, and energy infrastructure remained threatened, and 3 structures were reported destroyed. 15 states are currently flagged for above-normal significant fire potential, up from 14 the week before. And on the aviation side, the coordinating group requested 4 MAFFS-capable C-130s from the Department of Defense, 2 from the Air Force Reserve's 302nd Airlift Wing at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado went to the air tanker base at Klamath Falls, Oregon. 1 from the Wyoming Air National Guard's 153rd Airlift Wing in Cheyenne went to San Bernardino, California, along with a support aircraft and roughly 20 airmen. One from the California Air National Guard's 146th Airlift Wing went to Santa Maria, California. The Wyoming activation was written to run through August 10th. Now let me explain what those numbers actually describe, because the preparedness level is not a measure of how much land is burning. It is a measure of how much of the country's firefighting capacity is currently spoken for. Think of the American wildland fire system as a single shared bank account. Every federal agency, every state forestry department, every county district, and every contract crew pays into it. When a fire starts in your county and outgrows what your local district can handle, your incident commander does not phone a neighbor and hope. He writes a resource order, and that order climbs a ladder. It goes first to a dispatch center, then to one of the geographic area coordination centers that carve the country into regions, and if the region cannot fill it, the order goes to the National Interagency Coordination Center in Boise, which draws on the whole national account. That is the mutual aid system, and it works beautifully for the ordinary case, where a bad fire in Oregon is paid for with idle crews from Georgia and New Mexico. The preparedness level is simply the running balance of that account, published every day. At level 1, the account is full and fire activity is minimal. At level 2 and level 3, the withdrawals are climbing, geographic areas are moving resources around internally, and the National Center is starting to shuffle crews between regions. Level 4, in the Fire Center's own language, means national resources are heavily committed. Level 5, the step taken on July 18th, means those resources are fully committed on an ongoing basis, and that fire managers in active areas are expected to take emergency measures just to sustain operations on the incidents they already have. Read that phrasing again because it is doing a lot of quiet work. Emergency measures to sustain existing operations, not to attack new fires, to keep the current ones staffed. The people who make that call are the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group, and they are not politicians. They are representatives of the wildland fire agencies that live at the fire center, and they set the level based on fire activity, weather, fuel conditions, and above all, what is left on the shelf. They are deliberately conservative about it because moving to level 5 triggers real consequences down the chain, including national drawdown, where quiet regions are stripped of engines and crews to feed busy ones. Fire officials in South Dakota were explicit about this after the change, warning that even a county with no fire at all feels level 5 because its equipment and its people can be pulled toward higher need regions at any moment. But that is the trade the system makes. The incident management teams are the second number worth understanding, and it may be the one that matters most. A complex incident management team is not a fire crew. It is a portable command structure, dozens of highly qualified people who arrive at a large fire and take over the entire operation, running planning, logistics, finance, air operations, and safety, essentially standing up a small city on a mountainside inside 24 hours. Training 1 takes years. The country has only a few dozen of them. 24 were committed in the July 24th window. When those teams are gone, the next major fire does not get a worse team. It gets a lower qualified organization stretched past its normal ceiling, which is a very different kind of risk. The aircraft tell the same story in a louder voice. MAFFS stands for Modular Airborne Firefighting System, and it is a self-contained tank and pressure unit owned by the U.S. Forest Service that slides into the cargo bay of a military C-130. Each one holds up to 3,000 gallons of retardant and can push all of it out through a nozzle in the rear paratroop door in under 10 seconds, laying a line roughly a quarter-mile long. The critical thing about the program is not the hardware, it is the trigger. MAFFS is a surge capability. It is activated by the Secretary of Defense at the request of the Forest Service and overseen operationally by 1st Air Force, and by written design it is used when contracted civilian air tankers are fully committed or otherwise unavailable. The nation keeps a relatively small fleet of large civilian tankers on exclusive use federal contract, and those aircraft fly first. The military airframes are what you reach for after. So when you read that 4 MAFFS C-130s are turning at Klamath Falls, San Bernardino, and Santa Maria, you are not reading a story about airplanes. You are reading a receipt for a civilian fleet that ran out. Underneath all of it sits the physical reality of fuel, and this is where the calendar becomes the antagonist. A forest is a battery that charges with water and discharges with heat. Fire scientists track that discharge through dead fuel moisture, measured in classes by how fast a piece of wood responds to the air around it. Fine grass and needles are 1-hour fuels and can go from safe to explosive in a single hot afternoon. Branches are 10-hour and 100-hour fuels. And the heavy logs on the forest floor are 1,000-hour fuels, which means they need weeks of sustained weather to change state at all. Those big fuels are the memory of the season. They do not care what happened yesterday. They care what happened over the past 2 months. And by late July, after weeks of heat, the 1,000-hour fuels across much of the West have quietly finished drying, which is why the same lightning strike that produces a smoldering nuisance in June produces a running crown fire in August. That is also why fire season lags the calendar the way ocean temperature does. The longest day of the year is in June, but the warmest ocean water arrives in August and September because water takes months to absorb heat. Forest fuels behave the same way. The peak of solar energy is in June, but the peak of dryness comes 6 to 10 weeks later, which is why the Predictive Services Group at the Fire Center has long shown the western season peaking in late summer rather than midsummer. The country did not just hit the ceiling of the preparedness scale during the worst of the season, it hit the ceiling on the approach. And here is the part that almost no one is covering. Preparedness Level 5 is not a description of what is burning, it is a description of what is available for what has not started yet. Roughly 95 to 98% of wildfires in the United States never become news because they are caught small, in the first burning period, by whatever engine or crew or helicopter can reach them in the first hour. That phase is called initial attack, and it is the entire ballgame. Nearly all of the acreage, nearly all of the destroyed homes, and nearly all of the deaths in American wildfire history come from the tiny fraction of ignitions that escaped initial attack, which means the single most important variable in whether a fire becomes a disaster is not how the fire behaves. It is whether there was anybody close enough and free enough to jump on it while it was still an acre. That is what Level 5 puts at risk. When the Fire Center reported 23,151 people committed nationwide on July 24th, along with 513 crews and 1,327 engines and 153 helicopters, the meaningful number is not the total. It is what the total leaves. The engine that would have caught fire number 41,780 at 2 acres is 400 miles away, on day 9 of an assignment on a fire that is already 100,000 acres and will still be burning in September. So the new start gets a slower response, or a smaller one, or an aircraft that has to be pulled off another incident to fly it. And a fire that would have been a paragraph becomes a fire that needs a complex team. The second-order effects compound from there. Federal wildland firefighters generally work 14-day assignments, extendable to 21 under sustained demand, followed by mandatory rest. At Level 5, those extensions become routine rather than exceptional, which means that by August, a meaningful share of the national workforce is not fresh. Fatigue does not show up in the statistics as fatigue. It shows up as slower line production, as missed weather briefings, and as vehicle accidents, which have historically been one of the leading killers of American wildland firefighters. Aviation stacks the same way. Retardant aircraft cannot fly in heavy smoke, cannot fly in high wind, and generally cannot fly at night. So the exact conditions that make a fire dangerous are the conditions that ground the fleet, and every hour an airframe spends ferrying between 2 distant incidents is an hour it is not dropping on either one. Then there is the borrowing problem. In a normal bad year, the United States can lean on Canada, and Canada can lean back, and both can call Australia and New Zealand in the off-hemisphere. But the northern seasons now overlap almost completely, so the window where a neighbor has spare crews keeps narrowing, and the North American assessment published through the Fire Center this month shows fire activity running far above normal in parts of Canada as well. The lender and the borrower are increasingly having the same bad summer at the same time, which brings you to the ladder the country is now climbing. When civilian air tankers are committed, the Forest Service asks the Department of Defense, and the MAFFS C-130s launch. That has happened. The next rungs, used in previous severe seasons, are active-duty Army battalions trained up as firefighting crews and broad National Guard mobilizations by individual states. Each of those steps takes days to weeks to stand up and delivers people who are competent but not seasoned. The military is not a reserve army of wildland firefighters waiting in a hangar. It is a slow, expensive, blunt substitute for a system that has already spent its precise instruments, and the calendar is the final turn of the screw. The nation reached the ceiling on July 18th with the Northwest geographic area already at Level 5 on its own and 15 states carrying above normal potential heading into August. Historically, August is when the largest share of western acreage burns. Then, after August, California enters an entirely separate second peak in the autumn, when offshore wind events drive fires downhill into populated valleys with almost no aerial support possible. So the honest way to read July 18 is not that the fire season peaked. It is that the buffer was spent before either peak arrived. There is a way to feel that arithmetic rather than just read it, and it is sitting on the ramp in Cheyenne, Wyoming. On July 13th, loadmasters from the 153rd Airlift Wing guided a MAFFS unit into the cargo bay of a C-130 Hercules, a 9,000-pound steel pressure vessel winched into an aircraft that had been configured for cargo the week before. About 20 airmen packed out with it. Crews were expected to be operational and standing by for launch orders within about 48 hours, and the activation was written to run through August 10th. Hold on to the ordinariness of that. These are Air National Guard crews. Most of them have civilian jobs. They train with the Forest Service every spring, and then, in most years, they wait, because the program exists precisely for the year the civilian fleet runs out. Their normal profession is flying cargo in a straight line at altitude. The mission they were handed instead is to descend to roughly 150 feet above a ridgeline, in visibility degraded by smoke, inside the unstable column of air that a large fire generates, and then release 3,000 gallons of retardant in under 10 seconds while the weight and balance of the aircraft change violently in that same instant. Then climb out, fly back, reload, and do it again until the light goes. And the contrast that matters most is the one on the flight schedule. A week earlier, those aircraft were parked. The wing commander's public framing was straightforward, that his airmen train year-round for exactly this mission, and that when the nation calls, they answer. There is no drama in it. That is the point. The people who fly this mission treat the call-up as routine, and the routine is precisely what tells you how thin the civilian side has become. To keep this danger properly in proportion, some honest scale. Preparedness Level 5 is not a once-in-a-generation event, and I do not want to sell it to you as one. The country reaches it in most genuinely severe seasons, and it reached it as recently as October of 2024, which means this is the second visit in under 2 years, not a return from some long dormancy. What is comparatively unusual is the date. Reaching the ceiling in July, rather than in August or September, has happened only a handful of times in the past 2 decades. So this is unusual in the way an unusually hot week, in an unusually hot summer, is unusual. It is not unusual in the way a meteor is unusual. Put the acreage in the same frame. The 4,000 and 10,417 acres on the July 24 dashboard is running roughly a third above the 10-year average for the date, and Florea, of the Fire Center, put the comparison at about 4 million against about 3 million. That is a real signal, but acreage alone has never been the correct measure of a bad season, and here is the comparison that proves it. In 2020, the United States burned over 10 million acres. Yet the defining catastrophe of that year was compressed into about 72 hours over Labor Day weekend, when a single wind event drove fires through communities in Oregon and Northern California. In 2023, by contrast, acreage in the lower 48 was historically low, while Canada had the worst season in its recorded history. And the consequence for tens of millions of Americans was not flame at all. It was smoke that shut down outdoor life across the eastern seaboard for days. 2 very different totals, and in both cases the harm was determined by 3 things that have nothing to do with the annual number: where the fire was, what the wind did on one specific afternoon, and how much slack the system had at that exact moment. Acres burned is a statistic. Timing, wind, and resource depth are the outcome. So here is what the data does and does not tell us. It tells us the national system is fully committed in July, with the climatological peak ahead of it, with 15 states above normal, and with military aircraft already flying because the civilian fleet was spoken for. What it cannot tell us is where the next major fire starts, whether August delivers the wind events that turn large fires into fatal ones, or whether a strong monsoon arrives and takes the pressure off the Southwest and the Northern Rockies, which the July outlook explicitly listed as a real possibility. Nobody can forecast a specific ignition on a specific day. Anyone who hands you a date is selling something. What you can do is change your own odds, and this part is entirely within your control. If you live in one of the 15 states carrying elevated potential, or downwind of them, start here. Sign up for your county's emergency alert system today. It takes about 2 minutes on the county website, and that notification will reach you before any news outlet covers the fire. While you are on that page, find your evacuation zone and write down its name or number, because the alert will name the zone, not your street. Learn the evacuation vocabulary your state actually uses, because it varies. Oregon runs a 3-stage system. Level 1, be ready. Level 2, be set. Level 3, go now. Much of the rest of the West uses a similar structure with different words. Knowing which stage you are in is the difference between packing calmly and driving through smoke. Build the bag now and put it by the door you actually use, not the front door you never open. A week of prescription medication, copies of identification and insurance policies, chargers, small bills in cash, pet carriers and pet food, and N95 respirators sized for everyone in the house. Cloth masks and surgical masks do effectively nothing against wildfire smoke particulate. Here is the counterintuitive one, and it is the highest value hour you will spend. In most wildfire home losses, the house is not consumed by an advancing wall of flame. It is ignited by wind-driven embers that land in gutters, blow into attic vents, collect under the deck, and smolder in the bark mulch pressed against the siding. So the first 5 feet around your foundation matter more than clearing brush 100 feet out. Clear the gutters, screen the vents with fine metal mesh, pull the firewood stack away from the wall, replace mulch against the house with gravel, and get everything flammable out from under the deck. Prepare for smoke even if you are 1,000 miles from any flame, because 2023 already showed what a bad season upwind does to a city that has never seen a wildfire. One box fan and 4 furnace filters taped into a cube will clean a room for about $30, and it works. Keep your vehicle above half a tank through August and back it into the driveway. Gas stations lose power in the same event that closes roads, and the 90 seconds you save not reversing out of a driveway in smoke is a real 90 seconds. Photograph every room of your house on your phone this week, open every closet and every drawer, and email the video to yourself. Then call your insurer and ask one specific question, which is whether your policy carries extended replacement cost. After a major fire, construction costs in the burn area spike, and thousands of families have discovered too late that their coverage was written for the price of a house before the disaster rather than after it. And if a fire starts near you, leave before you are told to. Official evacuation orders are issued by human beings who are working with incomplete information under enormous pressure, and cell networks and power lines are often the first infrastructure to fail. The alert is a backstop, not a plan. Over the next several days, there are 3 specific things I am watching. The first is whether the preparedness level stays at 5 into August, because coming down would mean the national account is being replenished, and holding at 5 through the peak would mean the opposite. The second is the count of uncontained large fires in the Daily Incident Management Situation Report, which went from 73 on July 20th to 78 large fires being worked on July 24th, with 15 new starts in a single day. The third is the MAFFS activation itself, currently written through August 10th, because an extension of those C-130s, or a request for additional airframes, is the clearest single signal that the civilian fleet is still underwater. I will be reading the National Interagency Fire Center's National Fire News and Situation Reports every morning as this develops, and I will bring you the update when the numbers move. Subscribe so you get it when it happens rather than 3 weeks later, when it shows up on the evening news. The ceiling of the scale is not the end of the story. It is where the improvising begins. Stay safe out there.